Welcome to James Madison's Montpelier. I'm Ryan Nobles of NBC 12 in Richmond, and we're continuing our conversation on the Bill of Rights. We're pleased to be joined by a very great group of scholars, including the scholar in residence here at Montpelier, LYNN UZZELL. LYNN, thank you for being here. Paul FINKELMAN is the president, William McKinley Distinguished Professor of Law at Albany Law School and a widely published author. Gene HICKOK is a former college professor and the one-time Deputy Secretary of Education in the Bush administration. And I want to give you a couple of specific examples about the way the Constitution has been applied to practical debates that we're having in this country. Good public policy have been civil rights laws that have been adopted, which may have been in conflict with some of the interpretations of the Constitution. How have we wrestled with that?
Well, in the past, what has actually happened is that often the courts have decided that the right or the power of the federal government does exist, even though it had not been recognized before. And I think that it's important to look at the way that the courts have done this and contrast it with the understanding of someone like James Madison. I think that all the framers understood that the Constitution was not perfect, and that it would need to be changed with the changing times. New needs would arise. The difference is that according to someone like James Madison, when these new needs arise, what we should do to address that is actually change the Constitution. And during the debates over whether or not it was permissible to have a national bank, Madison said that even if there was some essential power that we left out, such as the power to make treaties, we still could not make treaties if it was not given to the Congress by the Constitution, but rather address it by passing an amendment.
But of course, in 1816, James Madison, as president, goes to Congress and says, create a national bank. And he says, when he asks Congress to create the second national bank, he says, when the first national bank was created, I opposed it on constitutional grounds. And then he says, I waive all constitutional questions because, in part, he says, public policy has shown that a bank is necessary. And that gets back to what you mentioned earlier, the necessary and proper clause of the Constitution. What Madison essentially says is Hamilton was right. You can't have a government unless you have a currency. In those days, the only way people can conceive of printing currency was through a bank. Therefore, you have to have a bank to print currency. He had been terribly embarrassed during the War of 1812 because he couldn't pay the army because there wasn't any national currency. You can't carry sacks of silver dollars out to the front and hand the troops the money.
To me, that's really the story of American constitutionalism. How does practical politics run up against the idea of a constitutional system? And a lot of it is what you see depends on where you sit. You know, James Madison goes to Philadelphia in 1787. He wants a pretty strong central government. Articles are defective. Later on, he and Jefferson talk about the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, trying to reassert the power of the states vis-a-vis the national government. And then he gets to the presidency. He himself wants to expand the power of the national government. So these are not new debates. In fact, we would be well schooled to go back to those old arguments and see how much light they do shed on contemporary issues.
Amen.
Mm-hmm. All right, it's a good place to finish. Thank you.